Okay. All right, so thanks again for having me. And this is the third of the three-part webinar on the neuroscience of substance use disorder. And this is about the science of recovery, which is actually not well described in the literature as of yet. It seems we know a heck of a lot more about the science of active substance use disorder, and the science of recovery is just emerging. That being said, the literature does give us some pretty good material on which to go forward, and it helps people to understand what they're going to be facing. So the goal, very simply put, sustained remission and beyond. Sustained remission is considered as a person being substance free for over a year. And as part of that, there's a restoration of healthy decisions and positive life experiences for people. Essentially a 180 shift from active substance use. That being said, the challenges can be absolutely immense. And I'm speaking about the neurophysiology of what's actually going on, as well as external life events that often are daunting for people at the end of their experience with substance use disorder. And so I like to think of it this way. We know that the brain has previously adapted to substances, and in the limbic system, substances now are equated with survival. Now we're adapting to a substance-free state. So essentially, the brain effectively is starving for substances. And this is almost completely subconscious, that is not known to people. The closest I can get to actual experience of people saying that there's something going on is the rapid cueing that people experience with substances, particularly alcohol. I'll refer to that one, that people report it's just everywhere, that every sign will cue them, not necessarily trigger them, but a cue. They become hyper aware of substances. The literature actually indicates that the nucleus accumbens and the amygdala become even greater sensitized to substances through increased dendrite growth. Essentially, taking away substances, now the brain is actually actively looking for it more than ever. And so there's a period of hypersensitivity and hyperexcitability for the first 90 days, as I can best find from the literature. Then those neuroadaptations of increased dendrite growth, the dendrites start receding, And so that sensitivity, that cueing, then starts reversing back towards normal. And interestingly, it's once again, it's not all about the substances themselves. The hyperexcitability and hypersensitivity of particularly the amygdala is really dramatic in terms of exaggerated emotions and often exaggerated behaviors just out of context of what the reality actually is. So I'm going to speak about what was identified back in 2005 as the Kindling Effect. And it was hypothesized and then shown in experiments with rats that it's actually repeated alcohol withdrawal, and the study was on alcohol, that it's the repeated withdrawals that contributes dramatically to these neuroadaptive changes that create hypersensitivity and hyperexcitability of the limbic structures, creating high anxiety, which is worse with each successive withdrawal. So essentially, the kindling effect, and I believe that this, an observation that this fits. Now, this was hypothesized before functional MRI, so we didn't know structurally what was going on at that time, except by observation. It was found that, at least in the lab experiments, that the greater the number of unsuccessful attempts at achieving abstinence, the greater the progression of the disorder. And interestingly, I think that we can imply from that progression of the disorder itself is predicated on continuous withdrawal. So that, think about the previous slide, now we have a reward system and an emotional system that has a whole lot more receptors for substances that have appeared over the first part of early recovery. So it's no wonder then that early relapse following treatment, following 30 days, can be absolutely devastating, because now the same amount of substance will give that increased devastation, and it will do it fast. To add to the challenges here, we also know that healthy prefrontal cortex functioning really doesn't start until about the third month of recovery, according to the literature. And so now we've got a hyperexcitable emotional state with the inhibitory function preventing adverse decisions and actions and behaviors based upon that through the prefrontal cortex as being dramatically impaired. So now we have often what's referred to as powerless over emotions. I've heard that over the years. This is truly the powerless over alcohol, powerless over substances. I believe that that this is at the essence of it, is a barely functioning prefrontal cortex. There simply is no defense. Even the big book will say we are without defense against the first ring. This is exactly what's going on. And so to add to that, perhaps you recall from the talk last week, the hypopituitary adrenal axis is hyperreactive for quite some time period. Interestingly enough, a study of cortisol levels of people in treatment found that the higher the people's cortisol levels, i.e. their internal stress, the more likely they were to not complete treatment. Not a big surprise. But again, this is a tremendous challenge to staying away from substances. Additionally, and this is for a variety of reasons, the person's actual self-assessment of their reality is significantly flawed. The negative valence emotional states being magnified, people get a very bleak picture of what their life looks like. And it takes really quite a bit of work and speaking to people to get an assessment of what's really going on in their lives post-treatment, what they're going to be facing. Adding to that, we know that memory is impaired and diminished significantly in active substance use disorder. There are simply a lot of things that people just don't remember. And the first couple of weeks of recovery, memory formation, which is necessary for new learning, is significantly impaired. And that can go on for a little while. As well, dopamine functionality, because of hijacking of the mesolimbic system by substances, dopamine functionality, if we go back and think about the neuroadaptations of at the synaptic and cellular level for that produce tolerance, now you have the same reduced functionality of the reward system, so that it just, things that used to give pleasure in early recovery simply don't or won't. Motivation can be dramatically reduced in people. They're tired all the time. And I think that that's dopamine functionality is at least one factor in that. And often that we've seen that take up to a year with some people to come back to positive. Again, the exaggerated negative emotions and decreased prefrontal cortex activity tends to lead to situations that cause harm. Again, if we think of that aspect of the prefrontal cortex that does a risk-benefit assessment, anticipates consequences, that part is just not working for a while. So people will make decisions based upon seeking a relief through the reward system to these impaired emotions. And what happens is the consequences arrive, creating more negativity, more stress, and things begin to build. Also, this is not reported in the literature, but it's something that I think is worth just putting out there as a possibility. And we see it with people coming into early recovery that they seem to have a tremendous amount of attention and empathy for other people and with very little for themselves. And I think that that's tied into the anterior cingulus gyrus activity that seems to restore fairly quickly, and again can present another obstacle to recovery, to actually focusing on one's internal world, rather than being stressed by the actions or prospects of other people. And there's definitely a hypersensitivity within people with substance use disorder to this. And it's very akin to feeling other people's pain. And it's real. If I poke my finger with a pin, I'll feel pain. And if someone else in the room does the same, I'll feel the pain as well. It's real. So that's potentially a very large source of issues outside of the person. We tell people, you know, try to figure out where you end and other people begin. Um, do not become completely overwhelmed, especially in treatment centers and early recovery. And for the purposes of um, our approach to recovery, I found that the term allostatic load in some of the earlier literature was very apropos uh, to describing the science of recovery. An allostatic load is essentially a sum of stresses, meaning stresses being defined as those tensions that actually cause physiological arousal. And in particular, we know that recovery is a very stressful situation, and the increase in cortisol releasing factor and cortisol, they're actually shown to impair healthy neuroadaptations and recovery. They will impair uh, glutamate functionality, and particularly in the prefrontal cortex, as allostatic load and stresses unto itself is the major challenge to recovery. And it's because at a molecular level, high circulating stress and stress hormones actually impair recovery. So you think about glutamate synthesis and hippocampus. We know that in um, people who've consumed alcohol long term, very much like depression, their hippocampus is actually quite a bit smaller than normal. So the only way that I can explain that is that this consistent impairment of memories actually is affecting structure on as well as function of the hippocampus, as well as prefrontal cortex. So these are, in my opinion, significant challenges to recovery. Um, a brain that is starving for substances, as well as all kinds of other neuroadaptations that simply take time to go back to normal and healthy. So how do we deal with that? What we're trying to do, and the approach that I believe we're getting these great results, is that we're optimizing the person's health state and making it not just a once of only in treatment, but to help the person on leaving the program sustain the healthy conditions for a healthy brain to readapt optimally. The simple things that just are so important: diet, vigorous exercise for those that can manage that, and sleep, extremely important in terms of healing of the brain. We also, for a couple reasons, we challenge cognition again of clients. We will give them new information, new things to learn, new things to remember. And our belief that fundamentally mindfulness is actually enhanced by understanding the science of substance use disorder and an awareness of what is actually going on inside the brain. So our program is about 60% educational, and just to repeat again, that's twofold. One, challenge thinking again, and two, get people to understand what has happened and what they can expect in the go forward of recovery, so that it makes expectations a lot more practical. One thing we do as well is usually later in the program is we'll do an accurate current state assessment. By that I mean, let's take, and I actually use good old Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People with substance use disorder have very different profiles in using that framework. And it's rarely as bad as people actually believe it is on entry into the program. So that's a help. And it also gives a framework to do some realistic life planning. And in terms of the life planning, what we'll do is, with the current state assessment of knowing what needs to be fulfilled through action, be based upon the person's individual strengths. And this is all enhanced through maximally reducing stress through the first year of recovery. I'll tell clients that, if you had a terrible brain tumor and there was a cure for it, it would take about a year. But doing the right things in life, diet, exercise, sleeping, stress reduction, socializing, that would put you into a sustained remission, they probably would. I find this to be very similar. And it's really the impaired functionality, the impaired neuroadaptations that just make these such a challenge. We also emphasize on restoring the normal reward system and prefrontal cortex functioning. I'm of the opinion that much of prefrontal cortex functioning is learning is experiential, and that focusing on overcoming small challenges, they don't have to be large, and learning new skills, you'll redevelop your own internal positive reward, as well as enjoying the positive activities that were lost through substance use disorder. Most people have passions in life, and with the unfortunate experience of substance use disorder, those are simply lost. And so reestablishing those things can be a really powerful approach to recovery. What we observe in the recovering brain. Last week again, I spoke about that phenomenon that we see at day 12 with, I believe, HPA axis hyperexcitability we find as well. And this is a big welcome and very dramatic for people, that now they're at about week 3, 20, 21 days, memory restoration becomes really dramatic, and people are much relieved that they're starting to have regular function again. As well, we find that that negative valence of emotions, that starts reducing significantly at about 14 days. By that point, we find that people are settling down emotionally, reactions are much closer to normal, and all days become much easier for everyone involved. Now, I also believe that even though the literature that I've come across speaks of prefrontal cortex restoration not really happening significantly until about the 90-day mark, we start seeing rational thinking and rational decisions returning, so that discussions on life forward in all aspects becomes much more rational and based upon healthy reward, which is what our reward system was designed for. And I believe that that's that's happening because of the cognitive challenges, as well as exceptionally good nutrition, exercise, and sleep. And we try to keep things as low stress as possible. That I believe we're actually optimizing the conditions for return of the prefrontal cortex before what the literature states has been seen previously. Another piece that we do, and this is based on decision-making theory, which I've looked at considerably over the years. And of course, part of the problem is, in terms of reintegration back into the world, with the functional impairments still in place, very hard to make a decision based on what's good for you in the context of other people's. And I do find that it tends to gravitate initially between overly jealous or overly generous, and a near complete lack of generosity. And somewhere in the middle there is an optimal decision that we teach, and actually have a couple interesting exercises on what's called the Nash equilibrium. I came across that while I was doing my thesis, my finance thesis, the Nash equilibrium. Uh, what's that about? The Nash equilibrium says that within a group of rational people who are trying to make a decision together about something joint, that the optimal solution is that every person is maximally satisfied. And so we try to teach that there is a place in the middle where all are happy in the recovering person's life, and to make decisions based upon finding that actually takes understanding the emotions of other people, um, which we discuss at great length. Um, what we find, and then again, this is all about reduction of allostatic load and staying away from work for extended periods for the majority of people seems to be far too stressful. And so we like to see people go back to work as quickly as possible, um, to not have to uh, be away from the world just because they've come through a treatment center. And with the mindset that people have, they do go back to work really fairly quickly and generally excel at it. What we do see are occasional slips, um, but, and by that I mean people will have a couple drinks or um, marijuana being everywhere, it seems these days, almost a new normal. People will have that. Typically, we'll be able to talk them through it if they reach out to us so that it doesn't turn into full-blown relapse. And that's full relapse has happened a couple times. Happens within the first 30 to 60 days on exit, and it is terrible. And I like to tell people that the entire effort here is restoration of choice to make healthy, positive decisions for oneself, to not be driven by this subconscious disorder that essentially hijacks um, the vast majority of decision making without even knowing it. People are making terrible decisions. We like to believe that choice is restored, and restored in a fundamental, practical way. Understanding strengths, understanding that recovery from this is going to take doing the right things, um, without necessarily doing things other than people wanting to just be generally healthy do. We continue to advocate that people do neuro feedback assisted meditation if they can. because that's been shown to be helpful as well. Continue with high intensity exercise. Uh, Typically, we'll see a weight shift of about 15, occasionally 20 pounds within 30 days, and it's all positive. And people like that. They look different, they feel different. The restoration physically is incredible within the first 30 days. That helps. Um, and we like that to continue as well. I believe that good physical health is incredibly important when we consider mind-body relationships, and health in that way as well. So there's just a ton of positives with exercise. We do try to have people make very small decisions in the first 6 to 12 months of recovery, that don't have the potential long-reaching consequences as the brain heals, because there's a couple reasons. Negative consequences: up goes allostatic load again, propensity towards relapse can start again. And so most people go back to their loved ones and their homes and their jobs, and it seems to work out really well. Right, so I've finished shorter, but I'm hoping that I could take some questions. Okay, I'll ask a question. Um, I assume that you folks are in the field. How do you find this approach? Uh, New, um, compatible, etc. One thing I should talk about is, because there is time, is how do follow-up support groups work um, using this approach. For the first 90 plus days, we recommend follow-up, and these will occasionally take the form of support groups, um, such as 12-step groups. And I do that because there's all kinds of benefits to it. Step one of 12-step programs, absolutely compatible with everything that we teach, which is the fundamentals of powerlessness, as well as the unmanageability of life. So that being said, do I view it as a chronic forever disease? Science clearly is proving otherwise. And so one of the worries that I still have regarding the 12-step program is that there is this cognitive restructuring that can go on, and that can be
Is she not around?
at the water.
She's in the water?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And so the forever diseases model is quite a burden. And thank you for the question, Kelly. What about those that are more averse to the 12-step program? How should aftercare be tailored? Great question. Vast majority of people that come to treatment want absolutely nothing to do with the 12 steps. They just won't go there. Whether that's just the nature of the people we have, I don't know. That we've perhaps attracted a group that doesn't want anything to do with 12 step. And frankly, how do we tailor aftercare? Preferentially, I like to see people followed at least twice a month with an addictions counselor as a check-in. I also get people to join gyms, or we also run our exercise program online 6 days a week if people want to join in. But I do try and get people for aftercare with a counselor, as well as regularly seeing their family doctor. It's very symbolic to do that, and effective that type of follow-up happens, because it remains an acknowledgement that they are in recovery. And in the early days, that is extremely important. So I find that that twice a month follow-up is really important. If people want to take on 12 steps, that's okay too. But I find that most people won't. And it's interesting. Well, I've got time, so I'll speak more. In terms of my own aftercare, and because I'll see clients from time to time on workout, or I'll get texts. I actually ask about the simple things, like tell me about your diet. What are you eating? How's your sleeping? How's your exercise program? What are you doing for fun? And almost invariably, those are the things that start slipping first. And I hardly ever have to deal with people with relapses, thank goodness. But people that are having a hard time in life and in recovery, it's the total basics. And to hang on to those things tightly. And I know this gets tossed around a lot, and I'll do it occasionally myself, but type 2 diabetes, diet, exercise, rest, stress reduction. This is very similar stuff. And I think that our clients that come through us, they'll acknowledge the simple things in life that are so crucially important. And I think that's because they understand where this is all happening. How long is the aftercare program? We still touch base with people a year plus out. But the main focus is the first 6 months. But that seems to be when the support's really most needed. But in terms of recommending aftercare to people that go back to their communities, I would recommend a year with a counselor or psychotherapist.
Thank you so much, Chris, for presenting with us for the last 3 weeks and for giving us
Thank you.
so much good information about, well, of course, I don't work necessarily in the field, but I do thoroughly appreciate knowing more about not only the field itself, but different aspects that bring more science into it, because that's something that I personally am really interested in. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, uh, I'll send everyone the slides. And like I say, I'm gratified by the opportunity to be here.
We're happy to have had you for the last 3 weeks, and I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your week.
And you too.
I'll be in touch soon. Have a great one.
Okay.